Okay, so welcome to Triple M 132 for week 5. And so this week we are discussing strategy, and this focuses on a firm's strategic analysis and also the strategic process. And this starts with evaluating how well a company is able to fit in with its environment. And you'll remember that we looked at the different factors that make up the external environment in week 3. So companies, they're going to be analysing what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, but they've also got to be very much aware of what their competitors are doing. And then once they've looked at their analysis, they can then make plans and develop some strategies in order to try and achieve those plans. Now, this topic, there are 2 parts to it, and they come from chapters 8 and 9 of your textbook. And this is also, I should say, the first topic that's assessed in the end of unit assessment, which will be in the exam period. And we'll talk more about that assessment in coming weeks, but essentially there are 6 topics that are covered, and they range from topic 5, which is what we're looking at this week, through to topic 10, which is the final content week. And then, so 6 topics in total, and then from those 6 topics, you select 4 that you'll write about. But we'll be doing lots of discussions and practice in seminars to help with that preparation. And also just a reminder as well that next week is the intra-trimester break. So there won't be any classes. And when we return after the break, we'll be in week 6. So, and just a reminder to, again, keep the questions coming in the chat box. Please, you are welcome to assist each other. And at the end of today's lecture, I'll have some time there to help as needed. Okay, so let's get started. So this week we are talking about strategy, and our acknowledgement of country is in the context of Deakin University's strategy. And so we'll read that now. So we acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging of all the land we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. So looking at this acknowledgement, you might have noticed that it's a little bit different from ones that we've done previously. And there's actually no set protocols or wording for an acknowledgement of country. And so if you if you wanted to write one, you'd use the words that match your sentiments and the message that you want to give. But essentially, the purpose of this is really to acknowledge those First Nations people in Australia and to show our respect. You'll also see here that 3 years ago in 2020, the university appointed Mark Rose, and he's a high-profile Indigenous person. And he was appointed to be the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Indigenous Strategy and Innovation. And within his role, he travels around Australia and he provides a lot of speeches, focusing on things like Indigenous history. He draws on his own personal history as part of that. And he also talks about moving forward with Indigenous changes at a much bigger national level. So Deakin University now has an Indigenous strategy, and you'll find that the majority of Australian organisations are also doing something very similar. It is a very contemporary topic. It's something in the news every day we're seeing. So if you were an organisation that didn't have something as part of this strategy going forward, then you know, it would be quite remiss so to ignore this issue. And looking more closely at Deakin's strategy now, so one of the key points is the notion that improving the experiences of Indigenous Australians, it's the responsibility of all of us. And it states, you can see here, together we will work to move Indigenous knowledges into the fabric of Australian life, creating a harmony of voices, ethos, and a shared vision for the future. So what does that mean? So as part of that strategy, you as a Deakin student are included. I'm also included there as my role as a first line operations worker who's delivering teaching and learning to the students. And so the teaching team, we're trying to integrate this strategy into what we're doing in this unit, and also, of course, into the course more broadly. So this is the plan. But there'll be a number of other measures along the way just to see how effectively that plan is going. And so those measures, what we call in management, are control measures. So we have the plans, and then there's also the controlling side of things, just to make sure that things are going along on track. And so in the case of Deakin strategy, these measures will happen at the end of this year and most likely at the end of next year as well, just to see how effective this strategy is working here at the university. Now, having strategies for Indigenous Australians isn't something that's just come up. So it's not new at the university. And here we've got the Naikiri Institute, and that's the National Indigenous Knowledges, Education, Research and Innovation Institute, and that's been running for 35 years at Deakin, and along with other areas of study and research too. So, but however, now, because it is such a really important issue in organisations, Deakin, as we've just seen, has appointed that Pro Vice-Chancellor, and they've created that 2023 to 2028 strategy. So hopefully by showing you these examples here at Deakin, we can see how a strategy is designed and then it's developed and implemented. And of course, that strategy isn't done in isolation. It's often influenced by the external environment. And so this is just to show you how we've got very strong political pressures happening in relation to Indigenous recognition here in Australia. And just some brief background, we had the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and that came out about 5 years ago, in 2017. And that had been developed by Indigenous people. And then we had the federal election last year, and we can see here the newly elected Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. He stood in front of the Australian flag, but also he stood in front of the Indigenous flag. And that was actually a first for a Prime Minister to do that. And on the election night, it was then that he recommitted the country to that Uluru Statement. And more recently, he's released the draft wording of the Indigenous voice, and that is going to go to a referendum later this year where all Australian voters will vote whether or not we change the constitution. So this will be very important because a country's constitution really drives everything we do. All our laws are derived from that and so on. So if it does get through, there'll be a change to our constitution here in Australia, and that will provide that recognition to Indigenous peoples. So again, by looking at this example, we can see how the external environment is influencing what's happening, not only here at Deakin, but also in many other organisations. And in previous years, other things have had precedence. So we've had the same-sex marriage vote, or the impact of climate change that organisations have had to respond to. But the big thing that's happening this year in 2023, of course, is the referendum for recognition of the First Nations people. All right, so with that introduction, let's have a look at what we are focusing on for this week. First of all, Chapter 8, and our learning outcomes are linked to that strategic analysis, and then we'll look at the strategic process a bit later. And this discussion is very much connected to the environment of an organisation, and you will remember that we talked about aspects of the environment, the micro and the macro environment in week 3. But first of all, though, we'll look at the strategic analysis. And this is really when a firm evaluates its situation in terms of how it's functioning inside the organisation, but also how it fits into its external environment. And so organisations, they need to do this analysis so that they're very aware of any changes in the environment, and that they're then prepared for those changes so that they can stay profitable and keep a hold of their market share. So, you know, they need to know, for example, what their competitors are doing. They also perhaps need to know what's going on with interest rates and are there any changes to government regulations, things like that. And so managers, and it's usually the managers at the top of the organisation, they're the ones that are scanning and monitoring their environment. and then they're strategically analysing what's going on so that they do have that competitive position maintained. Now, this week, when we're going through the topics, there are a lot of acronyms to get used to, and so I'm just going to outline some of these in relation to the analysis that managers have to undertake. And perhaps again too, you may be very familiar with many of them, particularly if you've studied business before, and you know, even in other areas like marketing, it's quite common too. But in this instance, we're looking at it very much from a management perspective. So the senior managers in particular, they're responsible not only for general managing, but also the marketing side of things, the product development, and of course that sustained success of the organisation, which is very key to what we're looking at today. So the first acronym that we'll be looking at is the SWOT analysis, and this examines what's going on inside the organisation, so that those internal capabilities, but also looking outside to the external events and situations that may have an impact on a firm. Another one is PESTEL, and this looks at the external factors in the macro or that general environment that affects all players in an industry. And then in all players in all industries, I should say. Another is Porter's 5 forces, and that looks at factors in the external environment. And remember that micro environment, we sometimes call that the task environment or the industry environment, but really it's focusing on that competitive environment. And VRIO, and this looks at how internal resources can be managed to get maximum value and to sustain that competitive advantage, and also how to go forward with competitive strategy and strategic positioning. There's that last one there. So this is, excuse me, very much the kind of thinking that managers at the very top of the organisation do, and that is the strategic development of what a company does to ensure its continued or ongoing success. So strategy, of course, is important to businesses that are on the stock market, that have shareholders, but it's also as important for businesses that are not for profit and other types of organisations, because they too must have strategies to ensure that they focus on their intended purpose and that they can have that, you know, be around in the future. All right, so to begin with, let's look at the components of SWOT, and this stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the strengths and weaknesses, well, these are an analysis of what's going on inside the firm, but you know, you may have already done a SWOT analysis of yourself as individuals. But when we're looking at it from an organisational perspective, the strengths of an organisation could be its employees, its patents, its cash levels, its brand, unique capabilities. So does the firm have a lot of cash available? Does the firm have highly skilled employees? So if you know what you're really good at, you can then make plans that exploit those strengths. Now, the weaknesses, they could be outdated technologies, employee skill gaps, or high operating costs. And this is needed because if a firm knows its weaknesses, it might avoid doing something that's beyond its capabilities, or it might try to improve on them before doing something new, or they might even just decide, you know what, we're just going to outsource that to another firm that's good at doing that. That makes it easier for us. So then the external analysis, if we turn to that next, that's looking more outside of the organisation. So there's the opportunities, undeserved markets, new social trends and technologies, and the threats could be from competitors, economic changes, or changes in government regulations. And a good threat analysis can really help better prepare a firm. And of course, it can also be very difficult to try and identify every single threat to a firm. And that's where managers might use some of the other tools that we'll be covering in this topic today. But generally, a SWOT analysis is a really good way to try and find out what's going on and what's happening for a particular firm. And, um, and when they do that analysis, they look at these three environments of a firm, which we've, of course, covered in previous weeks. So the blue area there, that's that macro environment, and that covers what's happening at that big picture level in technology, laws, environment, sociocultural factors, government, legislation, and those things like that. And as we know, the macro environment affects all players in an economy. And, you know, if we look at ChatGPT, this is a change in technology that's in that macro environment. So if you're a real estate agent, you might use ChatGPT to write up a house advertisement or a unit of ad or something to get people in. Or maybe if you're a doctor, you might use it to write up a medical report, or a teacher to write up student reports, things like that. So that ChatGPT, that technology, is available to everybody, and all different types of industries are using it. But in the micro environment, in that, what colour is that? Orangey colour. That's more specific to a particular industry or a particular group. So with ChatGPT, that's going to influence the higher education industry, but as well as all those other industries I mentioned. And that's why it would stay in that macro environment, because it is affecting everybody. So the micro environment factors include things that really are quite specific to a particular industry. So a university, what's relevant to that might be perhaps change in legislation that is only going to affect a university or a tertiary education system. Or it might be a big change in the market. And we did see that this year, when there was a much higher return from international students. So that's something that's very particular to the university's customer base. And then, of course, the third environment in the middle, that's the internal environment, which we've also covered. And that's not only about the policies and practices of an organisation, but it's also really importantly about the culture of that organisation. Now, we've covered this previously before, so I won't go into too much detail about it, but Pestle is another analysis tool, and it looks at that external environment, so covering things like opportunities and threats that are in the marketplace. And it breaks down those different areas into topic categories, and there can be a little bit of overlap of the different issues or events that are covered in a few different categories. Moving on to the next one, this is looking at Porter's 5 forces, and this model focuses very much on the industry and the competitors within an industry in particular. And these factors are all directly connected to the firm in some way and could affect a firm's potential to be successful in its industry. So we've got industry rivalry, that's at the centre of the diagram, and you'll see that there's two-way relationships between industry rivalry and those other forces. And this is because each force can affect how hard a firm needs to compete against other firms in the same industries to get customers or to get good supplier relationships and things like that. So when we're looking at this model, it analyses the potential impact of each of those forces on a company. And in the case of rivalry, the question of strength focuses on how hard firms might need to fight against their industry rivals, their competitors, to gain those customers and to get market share, for example. So it looks at things like, who are the new entrants to the industry? So if an industry has a growing market or is very profitable, that's going to attract new entrants. And so as an industry, as an organisation, you might start to think, well, what are the threats that are going to happen as a result of these new entrants into this market? Also, another one there is the power of suppliers. What buyer power is there? So if a firm provides unique goods or services, it's going to have the power to charge its customers higher prices because those customers don't have a lot of choice but to buy from that particular firm. However, turning that around, if the customers have a much wider choice of companies, then those companies will have to try to attract those customers by getting maybe offering better prices or perhaps better value for the money if they want to sell those products. And another aspect to this model is if there's a substitute product or service that might be influencing a particular industry. So we could see in the car industry that there's been a change towards electric vehicles, EVs, in Australia recently. So if you are producing cars that are only petrol or diesel driven, then the electric powered vehicles, that will be a threat. And obviously that will then influence a shift in what you produce and manufacture. So this model, it shows us that it's really important to be aware that in the micro environment, of what's going on, and that this is really industry specific. So we've just seen with the Pestel and Porter's 5 forces and how they analyse the external environment, but a company also needs to conduct an internal analysis. And the internal environment consists of employees and managers who, of course, have the skills and knowledge that are valuable assets to the firms. And this is really important. And this is looking at that value chain. So essentially, this is where the money is being made in an organisation, and it looks at what's the most profitable elements of what you do in your company. So a firm should try to be adding value at each of the chain of steps it follows to create its product. And the goal is for the firm to add enough value so that its customers will believe that the product's actually worth buying for the price, and hopefully that price is higher than the cost involved in making the product. And as we can see in this model, the value increases as it moves from the left of that diagram to the right, until hopefully that the firm can make that profit. So the primary activities in the bottom half, these are the actions that a firm takes to directly provide a product or service to its customers. Whereas the support activities at the top of the diagram there, these are those type of activities that are needed to sustain the firm, but they're not really directly part of creating that product or service. So if we look at maybe the universities, perhaps as an example. So Melbourne University, it's a really big research university. And so a lot of their money and a lot of their money comes from government funding, and that is put towards their research. Okay, so they get a lot of government funding for research. And so that is one of their biggest values. Deakin, on the other hand, we do research, of course, but it also has a very strong focus on graduate employability. So one of our values is the employment impact that it has. And so this is a strength, particularly if the employment market is not so good. Another big value that Deakin has had historically has been its use of technology. So a lot of those traditional universities like Melbourne and Monash, they've focused very much on face-to-face teaching, whereas Deakin has embraced technology very early on, at least 20 years or so ago. Strong emphasis on that side of the teaching and learning. And but of course, with the pandemic, a lot of those more traditional universities have had to embrace technology more. And so that has become a threat to Deakin, because all universities are bringing in technology as part of their standard teaching and learning model. But one of the advantages that Deakin has is that because it's used technology for a longer time, it's got a first mover advantage. So when we're managing the strategy within an organisation, we need to find the value and to see where it exists. And another important area where value can be found is in its human resources. And in a university setting, this is where you might look at those expert or very top professors in their field. So the university might see who they are, they might look at how influential they are in the media. And so those people in the human resource side of things, they become a value to the organisation. And if you might remember during the pandemic, one of our professors, Catherine Bennett, was always in the media talking about the COVID and the impact of it. And she was always introduced as Deakin University's Catherine Bennett, or Catherine Bennett from Deakin University. So she was in the media nearly every day. She was obviously very well trained. She was always available and always had an opinion. And so her face as a Deakin academic, that becomes very much a value to the Deakin organisation, if you like. So what a manager needs to do is to try to find out where are the values, and they might be in the support activities, or perhaps they're in the primary activities, that might be in operations or logistics or customer service. So, but they all feed into a firm's profit, and importantly feed into that sustained profit. So while Catherine Bennett is at Deakin, there's a value there. And of course, if she were to leave Deakin and go to another university, that would be a great loss to Deakin, and it could then impact Deakin's strategy. But it would be the other university's gain. So what we're talking about here is how some of the internal activities, not just that external market or looking at the customers alone, but those internal activities, they become very important. And there are other ways that companies can create their value, and that feeds in to their sustained competitive advantage. So as we've just seen now how a firm can use its resources and capabilities in its operations to sustain a competitive edge. But it's not just equipment and things that it can do, but it can also include these sorts of things to make it stand out from its competitors. And this is what we're looking at here is that VRIO tool. And this is a way for managers to try and assess what those resources and capabilities are in the firm. And this is, again, for something within the firm to be of value and to give a sustained competitive advantage, a manager will look at these 4 criteria and see, if it answers yes. So the first thing is it has to generate value for the firm. It also has to be rare. And if it's rare and owned only by that firm, then it's very hard for competitors to come in. And it's also got to be difficult to imitate. And sometimes organisations can create barriers to competitors or barriers to like products to try and stop competitors from coming in. So this is looking at not only being rare, but also making it difficult to copy. And the firm has also tried to, and the firm, well, if they try and capture that value in the resource and maintain that value. So this could be by way of patent, and someone's added their copyright. Fantastic, you're on the ball. And it could also, as we just saw with the previous example, it might be through an amazing employee. They're very hard to replicate. It could be by way of some innovation or some sort of research capability. So what managers really need to do is to try and create that sustained advantage into the future so that they can protect that internal valued resource. And Apple is an example here. Look at what they've done over many years with their product and the way that they're charged. It's very specific. And these are all like forms of quasi-protection in the way that they patent their products. And also the way that their product is, how they research it, and it's designed in one country, but it's then produced at a lower price within another country. So these are all the different ways that Apple have created a competitive advantage, and they're able to maintain that advantage into the future there. But really all organisations try and create an advantage, and not only, as I said before, by way of the product itself or the customers themselves, but a way of protecting that advantage through that resource-based view of the firm. And this is really a modern approach to strategic success, and that's protecting those important internal resources. And whatever is difficult to copy by others is really a gain for your company. And companies also decide to take strategic positions in the market in which they operate in. And one way they could do that, on the left there, we've got 3 different ways, but the first one there is through cost leadership. Another one might be through differentiation, and the third one there might be through focus, so what they choose to focus on. And again, we'll apply this to the vehicle industry as our example, just to explain some of these concepts. So if we were lucky enough to go and buy a new car, we might look at getting a cheap car, and we might look at perhaps a low-cost car like a Hyundai perhaps, or a Kia. There are a lot of those cars around, and we want to buy them because they are cheap. And that's really one of the main aspects of our decision making, that the price is low. But there are other vehicles where there's differentiation, and that might be a BMW or a Mercedes or other luxury type car, and they make themselves a little bit different, and they're focusing on a market of consumers who want something that might be have more features or of greater quality. And then there may also be a focus strategy. So for example, Tesla, they're very much focused on e-vehicles, so electric vehicles, and that's what they do. So with our examples, not all cars are the same. And the reason that not all cars are the same is that the car manufacturers are taking different strategies within that manufacturing area. And sometimes within one particular organization, they may have different strategies. So Toyota, they have the low-cost Toyota Corolla, but they also have Jessica says, the prestige end, which is the Lexus. So that's a higher price vehicle there. So sometimes as we see with Toyota and other organizations, they may take a few different strategies within the same market. And on the right there, the examples that are in this diagram are in the retail sector. And so in the top right, these are high prices, high variety, high value products. So, they're those luxury stores. On the bottom left, they label these the big box stores. And here we might look at a local example like Costco. So there's low variety and lower prices. And on the bottom right is low price, but a higher variety. So, and that might be your Kmart or Target. But overall, this is where companies, they decide to take a position, and then they set up their products and their operations to match that particular positioning once they've decided what that is. Okay, so I'd like to now turn to the second part of this week's topic, and this is from chapter 9 of your textbook. So we've gone through the kind of thinking that senior managers might make in determining a strategy, and now we'll look at the strategy process, and this is really about making it happen within the organisation. And the first thing we'll look at is the strategic process. So this starts with a vision and a mission. So who are we as an organisation in this particular industry? And the Deakin vision will be different to the Melbourne University vision or the Monash vision, for example. So what an organisation does, it starts with its vision and mission, and that's usually determined by its founder because they have a reason for starting the business. And then it goes into the strategic analysis, which we've been discussing up till now, and that's covered in chapter 8. And then we move to the next stage, which is developing objectives to make that strategy happen. Choose strategies, we implement them, we then measure and evaluate their performance in relation to our strategy. And of course, that measuring and evaluating, that's our control process. Okay, so let's have a look at the first step in a little bit more detail. So we've got our definitions. What is the vision? Well, the vision is why the company exists. What does it value? What is it trying to do? Why is it there, basically? The mission is how it's going to meet its vision and make it a reality, and the objectives are what it does to implement and operationalize the vision and mission. And the second step in the strategic process, and this is just a very quick reminder as we've covered this already. So these are the tools managers can use for their strategic analysis. We've got the PESTEL for the macro external environment, Porter's 5 forces for that analysis of the micro external environment with their competitors, and the resources and capabilities, that internal analysis to protect a firm's sustained competitive advantage. So once we've done our strategic analysis, the next step in the strategy process is to establish our strategic objectives. And strategic objectives are the big picture goals for the company. And they really describe what the company will do to try to fulfill its mission, I should say. And they're usually some sort of performance goal. So for example, to launch a new product, to increase profitability, or to grow market share for the company's product. And we've got our example here. This is for Disney, and this is their strategic path through its vision, mission, and objective. So for them, their vision is to make people happy. And again, the vision should be very simple. Why do they exist? But then in more detail is how they do it via their mission. And here Disney are going to make people happy by offering quality entertainment. And what will they do? Well, they're going to do it through their objectives, and their main objective is to release 3 movies this year. But next year it might be 4 movies. So that could change year to year. And perhaps we could apply this to universities. The vision of a university might be about changing society through research and education. How do we do it? Well, the mission is through having quality education and ethical research, and the objectives might be about quality publications or student retention or graduate employability. So different organisations have a vision, a mission, and their objectives. And in terms of implementing that objective, firms will look out at their market and they'll look at what's actually happening in that market. And you'll recall before we were looking at whether they choose to go for innovation or maybe for low cost or differentiation. But here's another way of looking at that. And this is the BCG, which stands for the Boston Consulting Group. And this matrix tries to understand how each part of the business contributes to the corporation as a whole. So on the top right there, we've got the stars. And this is a focus on the business units that have a really high market share and are in high growth markets. And they're the ones that are generating money or revenue for the company. So in the car industry, this will be the EVs, because it's the electric vehicles that are really going places. And so they're the new stars of the firm. On the bottom right, there are the cash cows. And these are market units that are much more established and they've got a high market share, but they're not growing because the growth is usually up with the stars, even though those stars may not be very big at the moment. So the principles in terms of managing income and earnings is to milk the cash cow and push that money up to support and resource the stars that have the potential to get very big. On the other hand, though, we've got the dog on the bottom left, and that's a business unit that's doing poorly, and that, you know, you might need to move out of and maybe divest your money. And then the last one there is the question mark. So these are those business units that aren't doing well, but there's a little bit of ambiguity as to whether whether you stay in them or divest them. So, are they going to be high growth? It's a bit unclear. And, you might look at things like, companies like Uber at the moment. Are they making money? The potential perhaps hasn't been as great. So if things do improve, there might be a switch and you might move them to become a star. So the idea of this matrix, or the aim of this matrix, if you like, is really about as an investor, where do we invest our money? Where could we get the most gains for our money? And again, if we apply this to the university model, we might say that in the Faculty of Business, this is one of the university's biggest faculties, and traditionally it has brought in, because of that size, it has brought in a lot of earnings for the university as a whole, but it's not really a star like perhaps medicine, the medical faculty is. Even though that has a higher delivery cost, it's got a higher impact more broadly than the business faculty, but it doesn't earn the same kind of money. So the medical faculty might be rated as a staff in terms of the university's considerations, and they'll provide it with a lot of resources, a lot more resources than the business faculty. But that business faculty, because of its size and there are a lot of students in it, that money will be pushed into the star faculties. So that's the kind of thinking that's happening in universities. And again, previously too, there's been a shift in students moving away from areas like teaching and nursing that hasn't been as popular in the past. And so those faculties were contracting. But at the moment, those faculties have turned around and they are actually getting bigger. And so again, as they are growing and getting a bigger market share, that will in turn influence university management decisions in the future to cater for that growth. And this one here, this is, oops, sorry everyone. Got a bit excited there. Let's go back. Almost there. There we are, on the right screen now. So what we're looking at here, this is how we, once we've got our strategies, how we then translate them into objectives and how do we make them happen. So when strategies are being made, they're looked at by the senior managers and they're applied to different levels in the organisation. And so what we've got here is that, no, hang on, that's the wrong slide. Here we are, this one's, that's a bit better and that makes a bit more sense. So we're looking at the first one here is the business level strategy. I'll just move a few of my Zoom mics so I can make sure I'm seeing. So, and if we look at the grand strategy across this company example, this says it's for growth, but that could again change. We could have a grand strategy and just want our company to be stable. Or if the market's particularly tough, we might want to take up a bit more of a defensive position. But in our example here, the grand strategy is for growth. But the main thing for this one is how the environment that the company is operating in will affect that bigger strategy. So our strategic objective is, at the business level at least, is to increase revenue by 25%. And in the university, returning to our previous example, that might be through the Faculty of Business, or for Toyota, it might be in the manufacture of their Corollas. And then the potential action is how we do this. So it could be to introduce a new product or to expand in some way, or maybe even move to a new location. The next one there is looking at the corporate level. And the strategic objective here might be to increase revenue by 10%. So how do we do that? Well, we expand by acquiring a competitor. So we might make the organisation much bigger. So Deakin might acquire another university campus. And at the moment, we are moving to India and entering into that market. It might develop a new business in a new industry. And the car industry is shifting very much to EVs. And there are many competitors in that industry who are looking to Australia because that is a growing market. And similarly, another objective may be to go into international and increase that by 10%. And that could be done either by exporting products or acquiring local companies, or having strategic alliances. And in the Deakin example, we're developing a lot of partnerships in India, and we've already established some divisions and branches in the in India itself. So what we're looking at here, just to sum up, these are the different levels of strategies that senior managers can make. And then having made those strategies, they develop them into objectives, which in turn become actions. Now, in that planning stage, just make sure we've got the right slide here. This is when, so in that planning stage, this is when we turn to making goals. And the goal is obviously what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And these goals could be short-term goals, like, what are we going to do this today or this week? But they could also be much longer term goals, like what are we going to do over the next 5 years? But what we do know when we are making goals, the best goals are SMART goals, because that really provides a solid framework to create good goals that we can actually accomplish. And the reasoning behind that is if a goal is specific, it can be clearly articulated. And if you're managing people, you can tell them what it is that you're trying to achieve. And if you're managing yourself, then, you might write down that goal. That process of writing it down makes it very clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And that idea or feeling or inkling becomes much, more, much clearer for you to actually get it done. And so the example that we might use, perhaps, and again too, if you're making specific goals, they're not only understandable to you as the writer of the goal, but also if you're the manager and you're giving goals to other people, it's clear to them too. And for us at the moment, I guess an immediate goal is to complete and submit our assignment 1.1 by tomorrow, by the due date. And so the next step is to make our goal measurable. And the reason is that this, again, helps them to become better understood by others. And so if we're looking at our 1.1 assignment, it's measurable because we've got a very specific word count. The number and type of sources are also quantified for you in the task instructions, but you might also set yourself a measurable goal in terms of the grade that you want to achieve. Then you'll look at, is it achievable? Well, if you made this goal for yourself 3 weeks ago and you've already made a start with the researching and the planning and the drafting, then yes, it is achievable. But if you haven't started yet and you are going to start tonight, then maybe it might not be so achievable or reasonable to perhaps achieve a high distinction, for example. Is it relevant? Yes, it is relevant to you succeeding in the unit. It's also relevant to you succeeding in your Deakin studies overall and in your degree. And sometimes this, in other sources, this is also called realistic, kind of interchangeable there, so that's okay. And the last one there is it time-bound. And certainly for our 1.1, yes, we do have that deadline for tomorrow at 8 p.m. tomorrow night. So looking at that, if you want to submit your assignment 1.1, that goal of getting your assignment done and submitted by tomorrow night, that has been a SMART goal. And certainly the way that the assignment task was designed by the unit chair, she did write it and design it as a SMART goal, very specific about the 3 tasks, what you need to do, that you should start it early and that it is relevant to your studies and that there is a due date. And she could have said, look, everybody, there is, this assignment that you've got to do around mid-August and, not being very clear about it. And that would have made your life very difficult and how you would go about preparing for that assignment very, very hard to do. So the idea of these SMART goals is that it is made clear about what is doable, what's achievable, and how to manage that in the best way. Again, going back to our definition of management is getting things done with and through people. So it is really important for managers, whether they are senior, middle, or team level managers or top managers, they've got to get people on board and to be as smart as they can be about determining what it is that needs to be done. And sometimes we can't be specific, and that's where other strategies might be involved, such as consultation or teamwork or getting other experts in to advise. But once we do have an idea of what we need, then we need to develop it through this SMART framework. And perhaps I'm sure many of you are already very familiar with SMART goals. And in terms of goal setting, the important thing is to plan, set that goal, design the plan, implement it, and then review the results. And this relates to the 4 functions of managers from FAIL that we talked about way back in week 1. So planning is setting the goals and designing the plan. Implementing the plan is achieved through leading. Organising requires coordination, and reviewing our plans is when we're controlling it. We're comparing it perhaps with our competitors, but we're also comparing it with the plans that we've made. And sometimes these are compared halfway through a particular cycle or at the end of a cycle. It really does depend on what our particular goals are. And these controlling benchmarks are also part of the measuring aspects of our SMART setting goals. So we might compare our performance to outside standards that are set outside of our organisation. And this next aspect that we'll look at are the different levels of strategic planning that managers involve themselves in. And this ranges, as we saw earlier, with the business level and grand strategies, which are more the large scale planning, but there's also the day-to-day planning that managers do, which is just as important. And what we can see here looks at the typical levels of planning going on at a company at any given time, really. So the top managers need to find out broadly what the company is doing and where it's going. And once they've got that strategic plan made, the middle managers can then look at what needs to be done and, what are the tactical plans that are needed to achieve that strategy. And the frontline or first line team leader managers, they then operationalize it. And if we go back to where I started at the beginning of the class, it's a Deakin strategy to engage in First Nations teaching and learning and involvement and commitment in the organisation. The middle managers, and these are the people running courses at the moment, well, they're all developing plans on how to implement that throughout their courses. And in this unit, we've operationalised it by doing an acknowledgement of country and bringing Indigenous recognition into our conversation each week. And in terms of the different strategies, we've talked before about the differentiation strategy, but there are different ways to do that. So we've got the strategic plan, and this is for products that are differentiated. And this will appeal to the market because they are different to other products already out there. And there are different levels of what can be done. And another university, Victoria University, they have tried to differentiate themselves from other universities. And one way they've done that is to have block modes of teaching. So, as you know, at Deakin and most other universities, they don't have 4 units taught across 13 weeks. And really, if we include the exam week, it does actually amount to 13 weeks. So they don't have that. Instead, they've got units within a 4 to 5 week block period. So students just do 1 or 2 units over 4 to 5 weeks. And so that's very different from other university models. So they've differentiated the way that they do their teaching and learning. And again, some people like it, some people not so much, but they've brought in an innovative tactical plan to try and increase their customer satisfaction ratings. And so the focus, whether that's on quality improvement or not, that might be debatable, but they've operationalized it through the way that the way that they've designed that course. And again, they didn't get engineers like this example to do that. They've brought in teaching and learning designers to change the way that they do things. But they also need to measure their performance. They've made this plan, they've brought in innovation, they've operationalized it, but how then the control measures come in to measure it. How are they going with that? How effective is it? Are they attracting more students than previous years? Are students getting better results? Are students staying on? Have they got better retention of students? Are students then going on and getting better careers and employability as a result of this innovation? Are there any complaints about the new method that they've got? So this is a way that they've differentiated themselves from other competitors in the university or higher education industry. And shown here, this example, this is more of an engineering kind of change about defective products and improving customer service. But the whole notion is about differentiation, doing things differently to that of your competitors, measuring the results and seeing if it does increase sales or earnings, or ultimately provide you with a sustained competitive advantage. Okay, so that does bring us now to the end of our slides for this week, and thank you for being here. Just a reminder, a few different reminders. Tomorrow, of course, your assignment 1.1 is due at 8 p.m. The seminars this week will have activities to help reinforce your understanding of this week's topic, and also to talk about the link with this topic to your assignment 1.2, the business report. And as we mentioned at the start of class next week, of course, is the mid-trimester break, where we don't have any classes. And when we return, it will be week 6. But you do have next week off. Do try to stay focused on your studies. It is a really good opportunity to catch up. Once we return, things will get busier and you'll be working hard right up until the exam period. But it is a break, so do look after yourself and your well-being, but do continue to stay on top of your studies if you've already made those plans. All right, well, I will stop sharing my screen now and answer any questions that you have. Thank you again, and have a great week, everybody.